Look at this. This is a personal brand website that I made using AI in about 5 minutes. And honestly, it's not that bad. A few years ago, this would have taken a good designer several weeks to create. But what a lot of people aren't considering is that if AI can build a website in 5 minutes, it can copy anyone else's just as fast, including yours. Logic says that anything on your site that came from a prompt, your competitor can probably get from a prompt too. Think about what that actually means. The whole point of a personal brand is to be so unmistakably you that if somebody copied your website tomorrow, everyone would still be able to tell it was copied from you because your brand DNA is so strong. That is the goal. And you can only get there if you understand the handful of things that AI can never copy about your brand, no matter how good the prompt is. I'm Jennie Lakenan. I've built over 150 websites for coaches and online businesses, and I can tell you now that the ones that feel like a real unique brand all come down to about 5 things. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what those 5 things are and how to make your site feel uniquely yours. Now, there's one idea kind of sitting foundationally underneath these 5 things that really make them work. So let's start there. What makes them work is perception. AI can't feel anything, but the most important things that really make a website feel like it belongs to a real person come down to how people perceive it. When you land on a site, you feel something before you can really explain it. And, maybe it reads really warm and comfortable and cozy. Maybe it reads like cold and stark, or like a real person, or does it feel like a template? You feel it first. And then, if you've got a good design eye, you can kind of work backwards and determine why. But that first gut perception really comes from the raw material on the page. And it's the thing that AI doesn't have a sense for. It only ever gets the evaluation that's sort of a description that someone wrote down afterwards. So it can echo a feeling that exists, but it cannot so easily create a new one. AI has the textbook knowledge of what a color makes people feel, but it cannot feel it itself. And that's important to know because getting the feel right is the first way to make a website that AI can't copy. Before anyone reads a single word on your site, they have a feeling. Does it feel credible? Does it feel kind of cheap? Does it feel warm or cold or premium or generic? That first impression hits them in about half a second. And this is exactly where you can spot that generic AI look once you know the tells. The gradient glow in the background, fonts that are maybe like a little too small, a grid that's perfectly robotically symmetrical, the same centered hero section that every AI site has. I heard one designer call it, designed but not thought through. Everything is sort of technically in the right place, but nothing on the page feels like it was an intentional decision. Now, that's not a knock on AI. It's just what a tool does when you ask it to build a web page from scratch without giving anything to go off of. It gives you the average. AI is a brilliant copyist. If you point it at something that already exists, it'll mimic it beautifully, but it's a really weak originator. So if you ask it to create the right thing from nothing, it's going to kind of default to this very average look. Let me make that concrete. So I took a real client, her name is Catherine Lang Klein, and I had an AI builder generate a hero section for her business from scratch, just as kind of an illustrative example. Here is what it gave me. Now, it's definitely not broken, but if you look at it, it's kind of off. Her image is really small and kind of on this weird red background that competes with the buttons. The headline is this really big blocky text. Now, this design isn't terrible, but it just feels AI generated. Now, here's what we actually built for her. The difference isn't that we added more. In fact, it's the opposite. So, we took out we don't have that weird red block behind her. Her image is zoomed in. It feels very warm. It feels softer. A lot of the feel isn't just about adding the right thing. It's about removing the wrong things, and knowing what to remove is a judgment that you kind of have to feel more than explain. To give you another example, we're designing a site right now for a coach who works with professional athletes and Fortune 250 executives. On the first round, something was kind of off with the design, and neither she or I could really name what it was until we dug in and we looked at magazines that her ideal client actually reads. And then we realized that what was feeling off was the font, the headline font. Ours had too many flourishes, It felt a little too kind of feminine. The weight of the font went from like sort of thin to thick. It's a beautiful font, but the magazines that we looked at, the fonts were a little more blocky. They had a little bit more of a consistency in how thick they were. So we swapped the heading font, and suddenly the whole page felt way more right. It felt way more appealing to her mostly masculine ideal client. We felt the problem before we could really explain it. And AI only really works in the other direction. A whole page of those decisions stacked on top of each other is really what makes a website feel right. But you don't need a whole page to see it. The same thing shows up in a single creative call, and it's the one move that AI can't really make at all, coming up with a genuinely original idea. Think about applying this to a logo. So I've worked with Erica J, who does voiceover work. She's a voiceover artist, and she wanted a new logo. The obvious move, the one that every voiceover brand reaches for, is to have like this microphone with kind of like a sound wave running through it as part of their logo. And we did iterate on that idea, but very quickly we realized, no, we need to get away from the obvious. So we took this diamond shape, which was already a shape that she was using in some places in her branding. We tucked the sound wave inside of it. It's very subtle, but it feels very Erica. And, it was a single decision that we made, but it made a big difference. Ask an LLM for symbolism, and you tend to get a very literal version, the thing that's so on the nose that it feels just very expected and kind of like what any designer would do. The really good design takes two ideas and connects them in a way that to a human almost feels subconscious. And that's just not something that AI can do very well. So that's about the feel of the website. But the second thing that you need to make a website that AI can't copy is craft. And by craft, I really mean the 100 small decisions a good designer makes about how to lay out a web page that you wouldn't ever really think to ask for. It's not really one big flourish like the examples I previously gave. Sometimes it's a lot of tiny decisions. This craft piece is one that AI does tend to skip a lot because, it's kind of just going to the generic defaults. That means it's not going to sweat this small stuff for your specific page and your specific reader. And you can't really tell it not to because you're not a designer. You don't really know what's possible, what's important for your layout. You don't know what you don't know. Let me give you an example. So I worked on a sales page for Dorothy Johnson. She's a breakup coach. The page was very dense, like it had a lot of copy and it had a lot of important information that needed to be very scannable, very readable. So we did that by breaking up the text. We gave a lot of hierarchy to the copy so that your eye knows where to go. It makes it really easy to scan. We tucked some secondary details into kind of like some drop downs for people who might have wanted to know more. None of those decisions were very dramatic, but all of it was really important. That page saw a 44% lift in conversions after we designed it around Dorothy's new copy. And the thing that Dorothy said afterward is really the best description of craft that I have heard. She said, Jennie thinks about things that I don't even know are options. That's craft. That's really, the expert making calls on your behalf that you didn't even know were on the table. By the way, if you would rather have a site like this built for you, designed with intention, like I've been describing, instead of just looking kind of fine, then that is exactly the work that my team and I do. The link to work with us is in the description. Okay, so those are the first two that people see the moment that they land on your website, but the next three really go deeper. Because the third thing that AI can't copy is your point of view, your actual opinions, and the specific personal details that make you a person and not just a category. And this really is, I think, the purest example of the whole problem with using AI to build your brand, is because AI really averages everything out. And your point of view is the opposite of average. It's the specific stuff, the personal stories, the kind of like quirky, funky things about you. So I'll use myself as an example here. When people describe me, they tend to mention my funky glasses and this huge earrings, which I don't happen to be wearing today, but I usually have these huge earrings on. They often talk about how I'm the breadwinner and how my husband homeschools our 3 little kids. And those details have absolutely nothing to do with web design, but they actually kind of do for me because they are part of who I am. And also they help people relate with me because maybe they've got little kids, or maybe they like big earrings, or maybe they like funky glasses. And it's something that we can really riff and connect about. However, if you fed my bio and my social media content to an AI tool, those are probably the details that it would sand off first, because to it kind of reads as unnecessary. But it isn't. It's the stuff that people remember. And it's also what makes us feel like a real person instead of just a category, a real person that cares about them. And this matters more every year, not less. The generation coming up now grew up entirely online, and they're on track to have the biggest online spending power of any generation in history. Studies show the thing they value most is authenticity. Authenticity. So when a website comes off sounding like it came off of an assembly line, the people who are about to do the most buying can feel it. Even if they can't necessarily tell you exactly why, they can feel it. Your point of view is part of what tells them that a real person is behind this website. So that's number 3, your point of view. Next is what happens when you take all of that personality and you put it in the right order. And by that, I mean structure. You give the site structure. And I don't mean just, where the menu goes. I mean, knowing how to lay out your story so that a stranger moves from, I didn't know I needed this, to I need this by the time they reach the bottom of the page. Now, this one AI really does struggle with a lot because it almost feels counterintuitive. AI, at its default is great at arranging information, but telling a story that actually makes someone want to act is a different skill. A real story is a bit messy, it's human, it builds a little bit of tension, it earns a moment where, it kind of asks you to do something. AI usually plays it safe and it gives this very tidy, informational site, but tidy doesn't necessarily engage very well. Let me show you what I mean. So I built a sales page for Dr. Megan Milne. She's a pharmacist who created a supplement brand, and she has this big audience. She's got over 4 million views on YouTube and years of comments from her people because she had been talking to them for years. She knew something really crucial. So most of her viewers don't even know that a product like hers exists. They aren't comparison shopping. They've never even heard of it. So we didn't just list what the supplement does on the page. She wrote the copy and we designed the page around a specific order. So let me actually walk you through it because I know structure can kind of sound vague until you see what I mean. It opens in part with the problem that her people are dealing with, shaped in using her own story as the grounding. So right away, they feel very seen. And then it moves into the thing that can actually help, which is, here's why this works. It's not a faceless brand. She's got her picture on there. And then it brings in real proof. It's got a lot of testimonials. She's got a lot of testimonials and a lot of great results on it. So that sequence, problem, and then the fix, and then her story, and then proof is what carries someone from, I didn't know I needed this, all the way to, okay, I need this now. The order is very strategic. In her words, when Megan saw this page, she said, my ideal client sees herself right here. And the month after this page launched, Megan's sales doubled. And that is the power of number 4, the structure, which leaves the last one. And that is the words. Here's why I saved this for last, because this is the one that everyone assumes AI is already really winning at. But here is why AI can't do this part for you, at least not do it well without your heavy lifting to help it. AI was never on your consults. It was never reading your YouTube comments. It never sat across from a specific client while they told you in their own slightly awkward words what is actually keeping them up at night. So it gives you the average of every website it has ever read, which is exactly the generic sound that you are trying to avoid. Because the words on your website should be the actual words that your audience uses, not the words that you are using to sound professional, and definitely not the average phrasing that an AI tool is going to hand you. Here's a move I want you to go steal. So go pull up every consult or discovery call that you have ever had. Best if you have the transcript, but just the notes will work too. Read through it and write down the exact phrases that people use. Not your summary of them, but their actual words. When I did this across a year of my own consults, the language was almost too good to make up. One client called herself the hairdresser with horrible hair because she knew her own website was a mess and was embarrassed by it. Another told me people show up at my website and they go, huh? Another said she was leaving money on the table and it's not even funny. You cannot invent lines like that. They're too specific, they're too human and raw. but they're also pure gold because, like we talked about earlier, they feel authentic. And the next person who reads them is going to read that and say, oh my gosh, yes, that is me. Let me show you what this looks like when the language actually lands on the website. I built a website for a company called Coach My Renovation with Bob and Veronica Krendel. They help homeowners survive a remodel. And there's a line on their site that literally says, avoid getting ripped off by your contractor. Now, a copywriter might probably wouldn't write that on their own. An AI tool definitely wouldn't. It's not clever, it's not polished, but it is the exact thing that keeps their ideal client up at night, believe me. And so that one plain sentence is going to do a lot more work than, just like a polished tagline, because it proves that they understand their audience's fear before they have even said a word about themselves. Now, here's where AI does help. And I'm definitely not anti-AI. So I want this to be the pattern for this video, which is use AI for research. Once you have gathered that real language, AI is a great research assistant. You can feed it the consult transcripts. You've got 50 calls, 100 calls, and ask it to pull out the phrases and analyze the patterns that it is seeing in the conversations. It's brilliant at finding patterns. What it just can't do very well is invent the language that created the patterns in the first place, because it wasn't in the room. So you gather, AI organizes, AI analyzes with your assistance. That is the human in the loop pattern that I really encourage you to adopt. What you don't do is skip the gathering, skip the research, and let it write the whole thing from the average, because then you're right back to sounding like everybody else. So now you have the 5 things that you need to build a personal brand that AI cannot copy. That's the whole game. Anybody can hand AI a description and get a website. What they can't get is your website. And that's the test I gave you at the start. If somebody copied your website tomorrow, everyone would still be able to tell it was copied from you. So get these 5 right, and that is exactly what happens. Your website is really your front door to a client relationship. So, someone reads your site and then they get on a call with you. And if the site was really you, then that call just feels like the same conversation, simply continuing the same person. It's just a continuation of what they've already started. Do that, and you don't just have a website that AI can't copy. You have a personal brand that nobody can copy as well. So if you want a website that gets all 5 of these right, one built to feel like you and actually turn visitors into clients, that is exactly the work that my team and I do. The link to work with us is in the description, and I hope that was helpful.